And I've always stood up and said, nope, my name is Mary Turner Thomson. Don't write under a pseudonym. I have nothing to be ashamed of.
Welcome to Hack Circus. I'm so excited about the guest this week. She is a truly inspiring person. She has been through the most extraordinary experience. It's unlike anything most of us will ever experience, and it was such a privilege to hear from her about it and hear how she dealt with it and how she's turned it into something positive. There was so much to talk about with this one that I've actually decided to put the episode into two halves, like we've done with previous episodes of Hack Circus. So you'll get the first half this week and the second half next Thursday. And to be honest, I would recommend listening to this one first if you have the choice, because it does set the scene for the second half. I really hope you enjoy this one. If you do, then please give us a quick star rating or write a review on iTunes if you can. It really helps. Unfortunately, podcasts do sink or swim by iTunes ratings because it all affects how many listeners we get and how much sponsorship we can get. I have promised to make 50 episodes of the show, and I keep that promise to you, which means it'll keep going until about the end of January, and then we'll have a little evaluation and decide whether I can afford to keep doing it. It is very time consuming, but so much fun. If you want to talk to us on the internet, we are on Twitter at Hack Circus, Facebook Hack Circus Podcast, and Hack Circus for the magazine, Snapchat, Instagram, IRC, all the usual stuff. So you can do that, or email editor@hackcircus.com. And we've got a creativity clinic newsletter to go with the Monday episodes, which are all about creativity and motivation and so on. You can get that from laylajohnston.com/newsletter. So I'll be back on Monday with a creativity clinic, and on Thursday with the second half of this chat. I really hope you enjoy this one. Do let me know what you think. Let's get on with it. Mary Turner Thomson, it's a pleasure to have you on the show.
It's a pleasure to be here.
I first came across Mary on John Ronson's Radio 4 show about comment, which I just tuned into randomly, and I was so gripped within about 3 seconds, and you'd already obviously started the story, so I don't know where this is going, and it was probably one of the most extraordinary stories I've ever heard. Like, honestly, it's absolutely incredible. Then Mary turned up again on the live show of John Ronson's psychopath test, which is called Psychopath Night and is on tour at the moment. Well, it's sold out now. You have to try and get it.
Sold out for this tour, but we're doing another tour in March.
Right. Amazing.
It's doing so well, we might well be doing another tour in August or autumn next year. So.
Right, brilliant. So you're already getting a sense that this is something to do with slightly unusual people with a bizarre mentality from what I've told you so far. But I don't want to spoil anything that Mary is about to tell you, because it is a really incredible story. And by the way, the show is terrific. If you get a chance to go and see Psychopath Night, do go and check it out. It'll be next spring now, the next tour. And also John's book, Psychopath Test, is great. And so anyway, yes, I recommend going to see the show. And I just really want to hear Mary's recount of her story. But this is quite boring for her because she does it every night on tour at the moment. So
a very bottled version. Bottled version.
Yeah, so we can go in a bit more detail. Well, the radio show had a more detailed version, I think. I remember things about watches and...
Yeah. Oh God, that bloody watch. Excuse my language. So you will have to do some editing here.
No, I don't mind. I'll mark it explicit on iTunes. We'll be fine. So, Mary, can you tell us how this experience started? You met a charming gentleman.
Yes, I met a chap online called William Jordan. I was a single mum with a 1-year-old daughter, and one of my friends in the year 2000 said, "Oh, have you tried this new thing? It's called online dating, and it's like, shopping around for a date on the internet," which was, quite quite mind-boggling to think about at the time. But, so I tried, and I actually thought, what harm can it do? What could possibly go wrong?
Do you now advise people against online dating?
I do advise people that when they're doing online dating that they make sure that they treat it like they're meeting someone in a bar. They don't give lots of information and stuff before they meet them. That they just do it as an initial attraction and then meet and see what the chemistry is, because it's a lot harder for people to lie in person than it is for them to research you through finding out everything about you and asking questions about what books you've read and what you like and what you dislike, and then they can research all that before they meet you. And it's like not everyone is online is a psychopath, but every psychopath is online. And it's like, it's just such a good thing to remember. It's like, just be cautious and be careful.
Yeah, so you went online and you started communicating with this chap. What happened when you first met him?
The very first email he sent me said that he was mixed race, that he was tall, that he was an IT consultant, that he ran his own business, and he'd spent the last Lord knows how many years chasing his career around the globe. And that one thing he had to tell me right up front was that he was infertile and he couldn't have children because of about a month when he was a child. And so if increasing my family was in the cards, then he wasn't the guy for me. That kind of openness, that kind of chattiness. And we talked for about 2 weeks online, and then we met in person. There was instant chemistry in person, and just sort of really hit it off, and there was no red flags. There was nothing that you could have portrayed, seen and said, oh yes, he's got dead eyes, or there isn't any way of actually spotting a psychopath just from their body language. It's a lack of response, not a twitch or something. Do you know about microexpressions?
Yes.
You heard about So it's like most people, when they lie, they have a microexpression. They have a twitch. They have an emotional response to the fact that they just lied because they know it's a wrong thing to do, and they have a conscience. Right. And so that is portrayed in a little twitch in their eye or the lip or the little flutter in something. A lot of people blink when they lie, because they don't want to see the face of the person they're lying to. Oh, right. There's all sorts of micro-expressions like that. But that only happens if you have an emotional response to your lying. So a psychopath or a sociopath doesn't have an emotional response to their lies because they have no emotional response. So they can lie and look you straight in the eye, and there's nothing that will tell you that person's lying. In fact, if he was sitting next to me right now, even though you've read the book and you've seen the movie and you've talked to John and you've, etc., etc., if he was sitting right next to me right now, you believe him, not me.
Yeah.
Because he would just look at you and go, well, I wouldn't say anything against Mary, but you just go, oh gosh, no, yeah.
I sort of wish we'd got him on the show now. But he is in prison now, right?
No, he's out again.
We're getting ahead of ourselves.
Yeah, we are.
Yes.
This is why John always insists on us doing it in chronological order.
Yeah, I can see why. It does make sense.
I got the email. We met each other. We hit it off. Within a month, he proposed to me. I introduced him to my daughter, finally, who was at that stage 1 year old. He absolutely delighted because, of course, he couldn't have children, so he was over the moon that I already had a child and wasn't going to be upset about the fact that we wouldn't have him more. About 4 or 5 months into the relationship, I kind of accepted that I was engaged to him. It was never that I said yes when he proposed. I just sort of kind of said, I've got to think about it. It's far too soon. But I started getting a little bit more suspicious because he would stand me up for dates and things like that. And would always say because he was working, because he was doing IT in a basement and he didn't have a phone, and sort of like just all this kind of thing. And he just started to wear thin. So I started to research him a bit, and there wasn't the sort of Google search that you have now. The things I can find out about people you would not believe nowadays, with image search and things like that. Catfish ain't got nothing on me. In those days there really wasn't very much you could research. But I did know that he ran a business, and because I knew he ran a business, I knew, being a business advisor, being a marketing consultant by trade, I knew I could look up Company House, which was the register of directors. And so I did, and found that he had an address in Gullen, which is about 45 minutes drive outside Edinburgh, where I live. So I got in the car and I drove there. And what I found was a family home big family home, about 20 rooms, something like that, with children's equipment in the garden and lots of antenna on the roof and all this kind of jazz, and was absolutely disgusted. He did not seem like the kind of person would ever be unfaithful, let alone somebody who might already be married. It did not fit with his personality at all. But here's the overwhelming evidence. So I drove home again. I phoned him and said, deep trouble. And so he immediately said, I'll be there as soon as I can. And he arrived within about an hour. And he stood in the hallway, marching up and down, talking to somebody, whilst I sat on the couch on the phone. And I was waiting for this explanation, absolutely furious, sort of waiting to dump my fiancé.
Just went off and rang somebody. I was like, hang on.
I mean, it's just like, it was just, you were expecting, I'm sorry, yes, you found me out, or something. But no, it was like, just stay there, I'll be back in a minute, I've just got to make a phone call. And it's like, so there was I sitting there, and meanwhile, whilst I'm sitting there, my phone, which is one of those old blue Nokia things, starts beeping, and it started going SIM update, which they used to do occasionally. The Orange or whoever it was would send out an update to all the phones, and it would go SIM update. But every other time you'd ever get anything, it would say there would be a number. And you'd know who'd phoned because it wouldn't tell you who, it would give you a number, and you would recognise the number in those days. And then it started beeping and saying, instead of SIM update, it would say MOD relay and ODCI relay, which was completely confusing because that wasn't anything I've ever seen on my phone before. But what he did is he sat down and he said, finally, he sat down and he said, basically, he was working for American intelligence, and ODCI stood for the Official Department of Central Intelligence. He was on secondment, and he was seconded out to the MOD, sort of as a specialist in Europe, and particularly his specialism was Israel, Palestinian territories. But he wasn't a spy. He was one of the IT guys. He was one of the guys. If you ever saw a film, he'd be one of the guys in the van.
Yes.
He wasn't sort of James Bond. He was one of the backroom boys. But he was terribly good at IT, and it was the sort of thing. It really fitted him. But the real key was that he said, you don't have to believe any of this. It's like, it'll all be proved in time. So you don't have to make a judgment call and say, yes, you're jumping in with both feet or anything else. Just hold off ending this relationship and just give me a chance to show you and prove that this is the case. So with a sort of healthy dose of scepticism, but suspension of disbelief, shall we say, I kind of waited to see what the proof would be that would prove that he was saying was true, or that he was completely bonkers. It was clear that he believed what he was saying. He didn't come across like a drug dealer or a second-hand car salesman. He came across as somebody who really quite humble and quite, just really genuine, just straightforward. So over the next 4 years, I guess, sort of like things were proved. People would ring me to say that he'd been called away. There was he was paid in money packets which were sealed in plastic envelopes which had MOD stamped on them. He used to carry a gun, and I must admit I did ask to see it, but he wouldn't allow me. He said that was absolutely not on. I saw the holster, but whenever he came, he would lock the gun away in the cupboard, which obviously I was pleased of. I had a 1-year-old daughter, but a gun in Edinburgh. So that was not, that put me on edge apart from anything else. So there was lots of things and physical evidence. But then about 6-7 months into our relationship, I got pregnant. And, so this was a huge shock because, of course, he was infertile. And when I told him, even though he's mixed race, he kind of leaned against the cooker and all the blood drained from him. He went completely white, and he was just like, that's a miracle. It's a miracle. I can't believe it. It's absolutely amazing. He was so overjoyed, and he was like, whisking me up and cuddling me and just, talking to my belly, everything. He was just so overjoyed. His parents rang me to say how overjoyed they were. They were finally going to have a grandchild, and this was going to be truly wonderful. So they were really excited for him. They were really excited the fact that my daughter was going to be in the family as well. But now he was going to have a child too. All these people verifying what he was saying, and it's just, I suppose over time, it became more normal what he told me. So time moved on, and we were supposed to be getting married, but he was called away to the Palestinian territories, and halfway through his time there, he was dropped into Jenin, where he was only supposed to be for about 24 hours, but it turned out that he was there for about 3 months. Meanwhile, I gave birth to our daughter, and how could I complain about him not being there? Because he was stuck in this war zone. I mean, he was sending me photographs of the devastation that was there, including, the kids that were being killed and stuff like that. He was in a horrendous place. And here was me, nice and comfortable back in Edinburgh, 4 balls and, 3 meals a day. And, okay, I didn't have much money and I was being a single mom effectively, but he was off saving the world. And after about 3 months, he finally came home, and he hadn't been able to take his boots or his socks off for 3 months. So he had to have them almost surgically removed, and his feet were mangled. They were black and blue and raw and and crushed. I mean, his toes were kind of squint, sort of like they were just horrible. It took him a long time to recover, and he was very, very thin, and he decided after that he wanted out of the CIA. Anyway, so where do we get to? Yes, Janine. So he'd come back from Janine, and he wanted out. So he started looking for contracts that he could do. He got contract with a very large, shall we say, software company, and he was working for them, and he was earning about £10,000 a month. So things were suddenly on the up for us. We had lots of money. We were nice and comfortable. Everything was stable. He was doing that contract for about 4 or 5 months. And suddenly he came across somebody that he had come across in the previous... He'd been undercover for something. And but basically somebody had recognised him from his former career.
Right.
And because he was now working under his own name with his wife and children's address as his home address, etc., they had discovered where we lived. And these unsavouries who are quite happy to fly planes into the Twin Towers... had now threatened us that if we didn't come up with money, they were going to kidnap the kids and tear bits of them and send it through the post to us unless we came up with money. So it was effectively being blackmailed. And by this stage, there was no one I could talk to. If I talked to anyone and told them what was going on, I was putting them in danger. So it wasn't even just, me reaching out for help. It was like anybody I reached out for help. And I'd been told very clearly by him and by other people that had talked to me about him from his career, that people would try and find out information about him by going through me. And what they would probably do is do something like put a child in my sister's children's nursery, and then befriend my sister. And in talking to my sister, they would then turn around and say, oh, my husband's away all the time. Oh, gosh, my sister's husband's away all the time too. Oh, where does he go? Etc. So the best way to keep everybody safe was not to tell anyone anything. First rule of any abuser, keep your victim silent. So I couldn't talk to anyone about it. And it's like... It just sort of went on from there. And so more and more money was going. At the time, we were earning, he was earning £10,000 a month. I was earning a salary as well. So it didn't seem too frightening because it was going to be coming back in if we could just do this, if we could just get over this hurdle.
He was asking for more and more money, or he was taking money from your account. Yeah.
So, eventually I sold my flat because we were renting another place. So I sold my flat, and it just got worse and worse. And it was almost like being a compulsive gambler. It's like if I stop now, everything I've done so far is wasted. I sold my life insurance policy. I sold everything I owned, to keep my children safe. And it was that, every time it was another 5,000 or another 1,000 here or another 500 or anything. It was like, if I don't come up with this, then everything we've given before is gone, and it's not coming. There's nothing coming back, and there's no way of getting ourselves out of this. We're just done. But the day came where there just wasn't any more, and he was like, what we, this is desperate. We must have this. Will you ask your family for money? And I just said no. So there was a line I wasn't going to cross, and that was it. It's like I might have lost everything, but I wasn't going to do that to my family. I wasn't going to bring them down with me. And it was probably about 6 months after that I got a phone call from the police who said, "Where's your car?" And I said, "My husband's driving it down in England." And they said, "Thank you," and hung up. And I got a phone call straight back off of my husband, but that time he'd got married and had another child. He rang and said, "You don't know what you've done. You don't know what you've done." And it was only one and only time he'd actually was cross with me, lost his temper with me or anything else, because he was always calm. That's a deal breaker for me if someone shouts at me. I don't do men who are aggressive towards me, or, any man even looks at me funny, as in, or there's no way if you raised a hand I would be standing there, do you know what I mean? So in fact, there's no way he'd be standing there, I'm a black belt. Anyway, well, I am now. But so it was that kind of like, it was one and only time he ever raised his voice, and I was really confused because all I'd said was my husband is driving my car. Well, it turned out that one of his fiancées at the time had called the police because he'd used her credit card fraudulently, and in using her credit card to pay for the repairs on the car, which I owned, but he was driving. And so the police had set up a sting, had caught him at the car when the dealership had said, the car's fixed, come and get it. And when they searched the car, they found papers pertaining to another wife. So when they rang me and said, where's the car? And I said, my husband's driving it, they realised that not only was he being charged with fraud, but he was also being charged with bigamy.
Oh my God.
But still, although I was told by the police that he was being charged with bigamy, he still came forward and managed to persuade me. This year's after 6 years of being brainwashed and giving up everything. And it's like standing on the very edge of a cliff. It's like you have to hold on with your fingernails to what you already have, because you don't know how far down it is. You don't know what's, and I had to hold on. And so I just... something by this stage, the back of my brain was like, I knew where this was heading, but I just couldn't. It's like taking the Grand Canyon in 2 leaps. You can't do it. It's like it's just one or nothing. So I kind of clung on to his explanations, which was this wife that they'd found in the car was actually his cover story. She was another agent that he'd been allowed to stay in the country because he had. They said they were married, and that's what their cover story was. But she was an agent. She wasn't a real wife. But it's very like, if you think about it, like a compulsive gambler. By the time you got to that stage, if you find a pound coin, you'd gamble it because you have nothing left to lose. And you just have to hold on to that tiny sliver of hope that actually he's the one that's been telling the truth all along. And it's so much so that you can't even allow your brain to enter into the idea that it's not true. You just have to. It's any addict or anything else, it's just that one, you've got to hold on. And it's like looking back now, I can see how crazy it is, but it is a form of brainwashing. And it was it's like I was saying to somebody else the other day, it's like no woman walks into a relationship where she's battered.
Yes,
by going on a first date, the man hits her.
Yeah, you don't put that on your dating profile, wants to meet a guy who beats up women.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like it's little by little, and it just they wear you down. There's actually techniques I can tell you about that they use. Yes, there's actually a thing you can study online. Certainly used to be 10 years ago. There's something you could study online called Black Ops hypnosis, which is about manipulating other people in conversation, manipulating their emotions in conversation, and it's quite frightening. But
do you notice people doing it now? Have you come across? Do you?
Oh yeah. I think some people do it because they're just they are manipulative, and some people do it because they're I wouldn't say evil, but just because they're maybe they are psychopathic. I don't know. But do you want an example?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what they do is they maybe they knock you down. So they'll knock down your confidence, but then they'll build it up again, right? So I'll give you an example. What's your favourite movie?
Back to the Future.
Back to the Future, really?
Yes.
Really? Yes. Oh, it's this great movie. I love Michael J. Fox. Who's plays, isn't he? That's an example, all right? And it's like, when I said really, you kind of went, It's like, even though you knew I was doing it, it still knocked your confidence, didn't it? Like a little bit. It just knocked you down a little bit. And you're quite a confident person. Yeah. But that's what they do. It's little things. They'll just do something which seems perfectly pleasant, but actually what they're doing is knocking you down. Does that make sense? And then, but they then, sort of like whatever it is you say, and they go really or anything else. They're kind of judging you and pushing you down. But then they're nice and they say, no, actually, it's really quite good. I like that because it's this. And you think, what a nice person. They thought I was an idiot, but they actually, they're trying to pull me up again. So you feel like they're building you up all the time, but actually what they're doing is knocking you down all the time. If you can manipulate someone's emotions by doing that kind of thing, then you can get control of them.
Have you ever been tempted to try it on people? I mean, it must be having all this, because you do have a lot of knowledge about this stuff now, don't you? Do you think you're kind of an expert on
I feel guilty doing it to people, even when I've told them I'm going to do it to them. And every time I do it, and it's like, I use it as that one particularly, what's your favourite film? Every time. And every time is, you get people that go, oh, it's Bambi, or it's, Chitty Bang Bang, or it's, Moulin Rouge, or something. And you always go, really? And they go, oh, God, And every time I feel awful about it. So, no, I wouldn't be able to. I'm far too empathic. I've got far too much of a chemical response, so I sort of like, no, really, it's fine. So I would be useless psychopath. I really would be. So, yeah, where were we in the story?
So he's just been caught by the police, but you're still not quite believing.
So I was, by that stage, yes, I still believed him, or still clinging to this belief by my fingernails. The 5th of April, I got a phone call, and he was supposed to be in court that day, and he told me he didn't want me there, and it was all going to be fine because, he was pulling in some favours, they were all going to, etc. And so I got a phone call. I knew his lawyer was a female. And this woman was on the other end of the phone, and she said, are you married to Turner Thomson? And I said, yes. And she said, are you also Mrs. Jordan? And I said, yes. She said, I'm the other Mrs. Jordan. I said, oh. And she said, have you been told I'm an agent? I said, yes. She said, I've been told you're an agent. And it was those 8 words, rather than anything else, it was those 8 words that shattered. It was like coming out of the Matrix. It was like the walls around me just crumbled. And it just, I could feel my blood pumping around my body, and it's just like going hot and cold and everything else, because it was such a physical response to something. The last 6 years of my life, everything had been a lie, everything, from the very first email he sent me. She'd been married to him for 10 years. They had 5 children together. In fact, when his parents had rung me to say they were so pleased that I was pregnant and we were going to have a grandchild, they had just spent Christmas with her and their 5 children. And she'd just had a baby, the sort of last baby by him as well. Their nanny had 2 children. She knew of a child who he'd had in America when he was 18. At the time, we only knew of 10, but we now know of 13 children he has by 6 different women. We know that he actively impregnates women on purpose to rip them off for money. That's what he does. He just is a master manipulator, and he chooses people. The more intelligent, the better, because otherwise, it's his games are rather like playing chess with a toddler. It's not interesting. It's interesting when people challenge him, and whether they find out things, but he tries to pull you back in. It's extraordinary. It's an absolutely extraordinary story, and it just So that's the tip of the iceberg. That's just skimming across the facts at the top of it.
I remember on the radio programme where you talked about this that I heard a few years ago. I don't know, was it about 2 or 3 years ago?
About 9 years ago.
Was it really?
But it's still going round. It's still the show I did with John Ronson. It was called The Internet Date from Hell. It came 3rd in the Sony Awards. So it's still doing the rounds. It's still going.
I'm so glad you're getting stuff out of this. I have to say, it's such a joy to see that you've got a book out. You've got a couple of books that come out this
international bestseller. I've got out. Yeah, actually got to when they released it. When they released it in the USA on Kindle, it got to number 1 in the Kindle charts in the USA. It was the biggest ebook seller for Random House that year.
Fantastic. And it's called The Bigamist?
It's called The Bigamist, yes. So
definitely check out this book. I'm desperate to read it now.
Because it has a lot more detail in, I presume, than what you've shared on these things so far.
I do want to hear about the watch, though, because I remember that being something special on the audio show.
I hated that watch. I really hated it. It was this. It was a very obviously kind of a fancy watch, but it was black, almost all black. With sort of like the almost like dots for hands. But it would vibrate and sort of wake him up, to go somewhere. It was like somebody was calling him, GPS or whatever, and he would sort of go and go back to sleep again, and then it would vibrate again, more annoyedly, and tell him he had to go. And so in the middle of the night he would get up and leave because his phone had, his watch had told him he had to leave. And so I hated that. It was the way that it communicated with him. But the thing is, it's all in the mind. All of this stuff is in the mind, and it's something that John said to me as well. It's like, So what was this watch then? How did they know? Sort of like, and I used to say to him, how did they know you've not got out of bed? And he said, well, it's GPS, And it's like, it's really simple when you look at it, all these things, like you don't have to know how a magic trick is done to know it's not real magic. But, John was saying, where did you get this watch? Then I said, it was just a normal watch, And he said, but what about I said, it was an alarm. You set an alarm so that he'd go when he needed to go. It's like...
I know in the Sheffield show that I saw, you had a question about. You said in your interview, they do on-stage interviews with Mary and another really interesting lady who I won't spoiler her interestingness either on this, but as I have half of the show already, I've ruined for anyone who goes. You said there that you'd be sitting in the theatre waiting for him to turn up to a date with you, and someone would turn up and sit next to you and go, he's not coming, and it would be very shady, and then they just kind of disappear. And I think one of the questions was, did the person who told you then sit and watch the show with you, which I thought was quite funny. But somebody else said, who was that that came?
I can only assume it was the theatre manager.
Yes, yeah.
And that's what I mean. It's all mind games, because he gives you a little bit of information, and he says that if I can't come, I'll make sure someone comes to tell you. I'll make sure you're being watched. It's okay. You're safe. People will be keeping an eye on you and everything else. So when somebody comes and sits down to you next to you in the theatre and says, by the way, you just let you know your husband's not coming, and you go, God, yeah, he was right. There are people coming to tell me things. But no, he probably phoned the theatre and said, my wife is sitting in the next seat, can you please go and tell her that I'm not coming? And as it happened, the theatre manager sat down in the seat beside me and told me, and then went to go again. I have no idea if it was the theatre manager or not. I'm just assuming it was. The thing is that I do know that Will Jordan had been in prison in the UK. He's been in prison in Canada and the USA before he came to the UK. He was in prison in the UK, and then he was in prison, etc. And quite often what they do is they take numbers and names and help each other, set each other up. So, don't know. Maybe he has contacts that also help him do that. Oh, I've also heard him answer the phone with a very English accent, and he's American. And I've compared notes with other people, and I've been there when he's answered the phone to some of his fiancés or anything else. He had 2 wives and 5 fiancés in 2005. And all of us went into Westminster, where he worked for Deputy Prime Minister John Prescott, which he worked as an IT consultant, doing IT work, not as an intelligence officer. But he took us all to Phantom of the Opera. Which I always think is hysterical, because I was wondering, why did he do that? And then I was thinking, well, Phantom of the Opera is about manipulating a woman, isn't it? Sort of like one man having control over a woman.
Masked man.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
And I think it was his little joke. You can do this to one woman, but look how many I can do it to.
Oh my God.
And he took us all to the same Japanese restaurant as well. And it may have been a sort of thumbs up to everybody, or it may have been, that it's simply easier to take us all to the same thing, because then he's not going to get confused.
Yes.
So it's easier to keep track of, and understand, But he must have loved Phantom of the Opera. He went God knows how many times. I remember he was very, very upset once, because when we went to London, we were supposed to be seeing Phantom of the Opera and we couldn't get tickets, so we went to see Les Miserables instead. He was furious. He was really, really cross.
Wow.
But yeah.
Nice for the system. And you all keep in touch on a Facebook group now?
Yeah, we have.
This is one of my favourite facts about it. I love it.
Well, one of the lovely things about going public, when I did, it was really interesting. When I first, in 2006, he was being convicted. And, I walked into a bookshop and said, I want to read a book about this. So I found out my husband's a bigamist, and, I would like to find out more about it. And they said, it's never been done. And I was like, what do you mean it's never been done? There's no bigamist's wife had ever written a book about bigamy. There's a sexy romp called The Bigamist, which is about a guy having 2 wives, and isn't it, sort of like Mills and Boon kind of thing. But yeah, nothing actually genuine. And so I walked into a publisher and I said, look, this is what's happened to me. I'm going to write a book about it. And they said, thank you very much. We'll have that. Here's an advance. To write a complete unknown, to write a memoir, purely because of the subject matter. I mean, it's just such an extraordinary story. So I started writing the book, and people used to say to me, are you going to write it under your own name? And I thought, just an extraordinary concept that people thought that I might be embarrassed, or I should be ashamed somehow of having been a victim of a crime. And always since then stood up and said, no, my name is Mary Turner Thomson. Don't write under a pseudonym. I have nothing to be ashamed of. I know I'm an intelligent human being. I know I am a kind and nice and honourable. I have integrity, etc. I have nothing to be embarrassed or ashamed about. And the lovely thing about that means that every other victim that stood up or read my book or anything else, I get about 2 letters a week from people who write to me saying something similar happened to me, and this is the first time I've heard saying, you've just given me hope, you've made me feel better. I've had somebody write to me saying I was about to commit suicide and then I read your book.
Oh my God.
And that bowls me over. That just makes me go, wow. That means that everything I went through actually has had a good outcome. I see it kind of like as not a terribly pleasant university degree. So like it's 6 years of my life where I lost everything financially, but I wouldn't be doing the things I'm doing today if it hadn't happened. And it's certainly, as I say, it's like waking up from the Matrix. It's like suddenly the world's a different place. But yeah, so because of the book, because of the, my website, because I'm talking and doing some motivational speaking I'm doing, people actually have contacted me, and women have contacted me saying, I just found out I've had a child by the same man, and I was involved in this, or they start dating him, and then when they find out his real name and his real age, they actually, get in touch and say, I've just found out this. Mm-hmm. We've had a lovely, lovely, lovely lady in America who was the latest victim. In 2014, she set up a police sting for him in New Jersey. She found out about his real name because he was calling himself William Allen and said he was born in 1975. And he's not, he was born in 1965, but he'd sort of changed his passport and his birth certificate when he was deported from the UK. So she found out who it was she was dating because she found a bank card of his and Googled William Jordan. And she found me, and I introduced her to 6 of the other women. She and I created the Facebook page where we all get to talk to each other, and it's unsearchable. It's only invite only, but we all get to sort of vent and compare notes and create a timeline, and sort of like the kids can all talk to each other if they want to. And it's sort of a nice little group of us, but we keep tabs on where he is. And Michelle made after he took a 3-year plea deal. He did 2 years, got out on good behaviour last week. So yeah, he's now out in the streets in New Jersey, and and believe it or not, Michelle bumped into him in the street about 3 days after he was released, and she was in the process of making a documentary for Channel 4 about him when he came round the corner. The filmmakers were absolutely blown away. They were like, when does that ever happen?
So they captured it on film?
No, they were so shocked they didn't film it. I was like, what? Why didn't you turn the cameras around? He probably could have stopped them using it. I don't know, but yeah, so it's a full circle, as they say. But incredible. So yeah, we have this lovely group. All get to talk to each other, all get to support each other and help each other.
That's really lovely, because it must have been really hard, like you say, not being able to talk to anyone about anything for 6 years or however long these people have been married to him, and now to be able to
it's one of the things with we did Michelle and I did Dateline, NBC Dateline, who made a program in 2015, and that came out, and there was a lady who was getting changed as a nurse, and she was getting changed for work, and she was doing an extra shift, so it was just a whole series of coincidences. But she sat down on her bed and sat on the remote control, and the TV switched on, and there on the TV was the man that she had been dating and living with for 2 years, who had gone out for cigarettes one day and never come back, kind of thing. So he doesn't even smoke. But he went out and then, just disappeared. And she thought, he'd been kidnapped or mugged or something. She didn't know what had happened. And then she sees him on TV. And, so she got in touch with us. And that's another one that's of the WJXs. So it's just amazing, the amount of people coming out the woodwork, once they see it on the media. And there may be people listening to this who have a child by him. I don't believe for one moment that the 13 children that we know of are all the children there are. Because that's how many we found. But this chap, I'm not a professional detective. That's just the ones that I found or have found me. It's one of the reasons why I absolutely had to be open and honest and straightforward about it, because there's guaranteed, I've seen enough EastEnders to know if you don't tell the kids, they're going to come home with a brother or sister that they've impregnated. Do you know what I mean? It's like, it's just, no, it would be horrible. It would be horrible. And there was other things that people said to me as well. They said, well, the children are far too young, because they were 7, 4 and 1 when this all happened. Far too young to tell them. Wait till they're older. I was like, well, when? When they're 10? Do I tell them then? Or, what do I tell them to them? Do I say he's dead? Do I lie to them? Or do I wait till they hit puberty? Or maybe when they're 18 or 21? When exactly is a good time to say your dad's a psychopath? It's like... So I was just absolutely straight and upfront and honest with the children and told them what had happened in terms that they could understand. So I've never said he's evil. I've never said what a bastard or anything else. I've always just described him for what he is, and he is a psychopath. He is a psychopath stroke sociopath. He is devoid of conscience and remorse. And when I talked to the kids about it, I said, if your father was blind, you wouldn't blame yourselves that he couldn't see you. He has no capacity to love. He has no capacity to have an empathic response to other people. That is a condition and a personality disorder similar to or opposite to autism. And if their father was autistic, they would deal with him in a different way. He's not. He's a psychopath, and that means that he has no emotional response to other people's pain and no emotional response or empathy or love for anybody he's involved in, including his children.
Well, that's it for this week. Thank you very much for listening. This has only been the first half of my conversation with Mary, so do tune in again next Thursday for the second part of the chat that we had. And in the second half, we go into some detail about what she's doing now and how the experience has changed and helped her, and really, more importantly, helped her to help other people. I just think she's the most inspiring person, and I hope you agree, and we'll come back and listen to the second half next week. Thanks so much for listening this week, and I'll catch you again on Monday for Creativity Clinic.